Yu-Gi-Oh! GX was a show that asked an important question. What if there was a generation that was next? Many still can't handle the answer. In this case, the next dark types we're looking at for support report are the ones predominantly featured in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, first up being the long-awaited Volcanics. Konami slowly remembering all the types left by the wayside over the years has been pretty fun. Since 2017, we got a good bunch of dinosaurs, rocks, thunders and reptiles, and more aggressively than ever, 2023 finally marked the overdue return of Pyros, and really, the fire attribute as a whole. Hope we get some Dark Warriors or Dragons this year to shake it up! Volcanic Rimfire is a card whose name I really relate to as somebody with IBS. However, unlike the one my asshole is subjected to after a round of Buffalo Ranch Wings, this Rimfire is pretty useful. It's one of those do-it-all consistency boosters, floating into graveyard setup or more blaze accelerating. It's incredibly easy to dump with this deck, swaps accelerators on the field to reuse their effects or make new ones, and much like Shell, it's a level 1 Pyro, meaning copious amounts of synergy with Snake Eyes and the local Aquaholic. This was definitely not a coincidental design choice, as another late GX adaptation that you need to throw your money into a bonfire to get searches a good half of your deck. We're off to a really good start, and it continues on into their next card. Volcanic Trooper's first effect is some plain good old searching. This was a deck that already had a surprising amount of consistency back in the day, and now it's boosted up even more by getting the first monster that can fetch anything in the archetype. Now, the problem is still that your plays very quickly die to ash due to being normal summon heavy, but going back to Shell, the deck also works very well in conjunction with Horus, getting plenty of discard fodder and versatility to play through negates. Additional engines are kind of imperative to tie this deck together, but the good news is that they never detract from the Volcanic gameplay style as much as they give it some resilience. The second effect seems a bit weird at first, but it does set up the graveyard, enables accelerator targeting, prevents imperm, and this support wave did come with focus on burn damage in relation to the opponent's cards, so it fits right in. You can also FTK with it, which doesn't necessarily mean a good thing depending on your point of view, but on this battlefield no one wins. Volcanic Emperor is something that gives me hope for a legacy boss monster design in the future, because they somehow made this guy pretty good without giving him a generic Omni negate. If you're complaining that it's just an obnoxious burn card in place of that, I can't hear you over these fire trucks rushing to salvage your life points. For one, it's extremely easy to summon given how simple it is to dump a blaze accelerator, he has a massive body with that extra 100 attack really putting in work sometimes, and fetching volcanic traps is very good given the 2 they received alongside it. As for that burn damage, well, depending on how you summoned it, Emperor can hit the field dealing at least 1500, and following it up with some punishment burn similar to Flare Metal or Masquerade can really put the opponent close to easy kill range. It's tough to deal with and helps out your win condition, so there's nothing to complain about. I have trouble talking about cards when there's nothing to complain about, so Fairy Guardian really ticks me off. Fire Ejection is the first of their 2 new spells, and it's dangerous. It wasn't enough for Pyros to get a Rota, but now here's a Foolish Burial with extra burn damage and token spawning in case you're playing Volcanics. This one isn't as necessary to run in a standard build, they have plenty of graveyard setup without it, although it's still not a bad choice, but it's one of the essential playmakers in the FTK variant. The point is to make a few bomb tokens, blow them up, get Emperor on the field with his burn on summon, and then use traps to wipe the rest of the opponent's life points away come next turn. One of the new Volcanic traps is integral to this, but also Spiritual Fire Art Kurenai, which is very easy to access with this thing, which summons itself from the goddamn deck if you have a fire monster and a spellcaster, the latter being very simple to make with links. The sheer amount of useful interactions in this deck that it never had until last year is kind of insane. It's like being proud of your son for getting into Harvard, but you miss him running around the house hitting his head into walls. Volcanic Blaze Accelerator is everything you want in a Blaze Accelerator and then some. First of all, it has Volcanic in the name, so you can actually get it without praying to draw into Rocket. Sending one of the old ones to the graveyard is less of a cost and more of a bonus, as Rimfire can ditch it for reload, which still makes Scattershot worth running as a quick play Raigeki. The special summon effect is simply good, not much to add here, and the pop effect is standard removal that comes with a Foolish for level 1 Pyros, and is a first turn playmaker if you have a bomb token up. Not to mention, it's also a soft once per turn, meaning Rimfire can replace it with another one of itself to repeat the effect. You know what? I'll say it. They made these too good. I'm not complaining, but it almost feels like a mistake that this card doesn't say something like, you also take all the effect damage your opponent does. Their first new trap is Volcanic Emission. The first effect is cute, but mostly gimmicky, in case you wanna jump scare the opponent with Doomfire during the battle phase, or you're just in a real pinch to make any kind of play. The second effect is much more important, dealing a potentially massive amount of burn damage with the appropriate setup. It can be a bit tricky to maximize the output, involving field swapping shenanigans, but it's still a pretty nasty card even without it. 1500 damage becomes a bit bit more than an inconvenient chunk when it happens repeatedly, you know. I guess this also gives you a reason to run Queen, maybe? It is a kaiju that you can turn into a 2500 burn, so I can see it coming in handy. And hell, the artwork literally tells you to use Doomfire and Queen here, so take of that what you will. The last volcanic card in this lineup is the continuous trap Volcanic Inferno. It's the archetype's very first negate. It's not super versatile, only working on monsters in the field, but it comes with even more burn damage, as well as graveyard and banish recycling, so you can start shelling and rimfiring all over again. Do you even need me to tell you anything else? Holy crap! I don't know whether to ascribe the potency of these cards to Volcanics having an inherently versatile gameplay style since day one, or to Konami's intense pushing of Pyros, or both, but legacy support of this caliber doesn't happen often. With 7 cards, this old flicker was propelled to a firestorm with plenty of synergy with some decks making waves in the meta. Not to mention there's still plenty of generic support coming out that allows it to keep up the pace, like Electro Gunner, Flame Banshee or Promethean Princess, giving it a bunch of build variety as well. I don't suppose it was just reverence for Austin O'Brien that made these cards as good as they are, but I'm glad one of the coolest characters in GX got some more proverbial spotlight this way. Always remember, burn to the ground. Burn to the ground. Arguably way more iconic, yet less meta-relevant, Ancient Gears also received a handful of support last year, the largest wave they got since the structure deck. We start off with a level 4 Ancient Gear Commander, telling you to get your elemental hero playing ass out of the academy before you're OTK'd, Nanone! This one's alright. Konami still likes to pretend you'll be primarily normal summoning with this deck like it's the mid-2000s, but at least they dropped the pretenses of tributing gadgets to make your plays like it's the early 1900s. This makes the first effect solid field building along with graveyard setup, and the second one can serve as a good extender, although I wish it could also summon from the deck. The third effect is very blatant promotion for their new trap card, because you sure as hell aren't putting Reborn on the field with this, but I'll forgive them because the card in question is actually pretty good, as we'll see later. Commander initially comes off a bit weird, but it's quickly evident it's perfectly solid Ancient Gear support. Ancient Gear Tanker offers some more field presence in a much less pretentious way than Commander, but actually has pretty good synergy with it, being able to instantly revive the Ancient Gear Golem if it's turn 2. And if you're trying to do turn 1 setup with Ancient Gears, I'm sorry, the deck still just powers off if there's nothing to beat up. The second effect is much appreciated, seeing how this archetype inadvertently made popping its own back row a central gameplay style, when back in 2008 they made the field spell like that. The attack boost is nice and can definitely help out the OTK, but it's really an extra on top of the self-pop effect. It's another good one, and I'm also kind of a fan of the artwork. I like when old crappy cards get repurposed within the archetype's new support, seeing how this is just Ancient Gear Tank in a dynamic pose, but actually useful as a card. Their last monster in this wave of support was surprisingly not a new fusion, but a brand new Golem retrain. Ancient Gear Dark Golem, Earth actually, is almost comically good for the deck, if only due to searching 2 cards simultaneously. This is one of those cases where an effect would be broken in any meta-relevant deck, but was allowed to happen here because the mindset was, it's Ancient Gears, who gives a shit? And that's very good. To call this an extender would be silly, because it's more like a turbocharge, as it basically doubles your plays for the turn. It's Golem without a summon restriction, it's treated as one on the field, which has a bunch of utility in the deck. The Ridiculous Surge can also set up the graveyard, and it disables back row while attacking like a good Ancient Gear should. What's even the caveat here? It doesn't have piercing? Shut up! What's the last time you saw a monster in defense position? Goat format? One thing that's funny is that any Ancient Gear searcher still has to mention you cannot set cards that turn, solely because Konami is terrified of Ancient Gear Drill's dormant potential. On one hand, I get it searches any spell, but on the other, I hate that a card nobody has considered running since the Bush administration has to bloat the effects of new support this way. That aside, this is one of the greatest retrains of all time, and almost a complete replacement for the original, which you still have to run but in much smaller ratios than before. I would kiss it if it didn't come with an extreme risk of contracting tetanus. Ancient Gear Advance is another miracle for the archetype, honestly. For one, it searches any Ancient Gear back row, giving you easy access to your starters, but the second effect is a stroke of genius. Tributing a monster means you're clearing your field to play Catapult, making Wyvern Search effect way better as it no longer has to clog up your monster zone, preventing you from doing so. And that's just the cost. For this, you get a draw and a free tribute summon in case you can't place a golem on the field by other ways. This is a crazy boost for Ancient Gear's consistency and gives you so much to work with, regardless of the variant you're playing. Well, unless you really like the dragons, but I'm kinda glad they decided to forget about these. The final new Ancient Gear card is the Trap Ancient Gear Duel. Oh my god, Flare Neos, look out! It's some long overdue protection for your golems and golem-likes, as well as a miracle fusion that turns your ultimate golem into the ultimatest golem. I wish it could also summon Chaos Giant, and it does kind of invalidate running Megaton, but it is aggressively searchable and Commander exists just to put it on the field, so there is no reason not to run it. Make sure to have a good Ancient Gear Duel with this Ancient Gear Duel. When it comes to short and simple legacy support for old anime favorites, this is exactly what I like to see. Patching up what the deck was lacking and spicing it up with some new ideas while focusing on what it was good at in the first place. Ancient Gears are still the essence of an OTK deck, never once flirting with the idea of control, nor caring that going first means the gears corrode irreparably before you get to do anything. The point is still punching things in the face as hard as possible as soon as you can, and they're doing it as well as they always have. Finally, we have one new Arcana Force monster. I say finally in the sense that this is the last card in the video, not that it was something I was hyped about. Arcana Force 15, the Friend. For one, it's nice that they're going the Temperance route and giving these things actual effects besides the coin flip garbage. Searching the field spell on this card is a reasonable thing to have because said field spell removes the coin flip garbage altogether. And speaking of which, it thinks it's an Unchained. I don't really know what to say here. Sure, it blows shit up and it doesn't have an objectively bad effect, but these don't add anything to the deck. The card is still a pain in the ass to summon within the archetype and there's still no win condition besides basic beatdown. Arcana Force as a concept is literally incomplete, missing a bunch of the major arcana, anime support, or any real playmakers to speak of. People assumed the Fiend's reveal would lead into Legacy of Destruction providing these things for the archetype, but then Ancient Gear stole the show. And as glad as I am about that, it just makes this card's release even weirder. You can't drip feed Arcana Force support. It's not a deck whose problems can be solved with one or two cards. It has to be a concentrated effort to let you do something besides gambling on how hard you're gonna die. Also, I don't like the art because they neutered the acid trip background of the anime version. Catch you in part 3!